Ukrainian army pose great problems for the Russian army. For more than 2 years of war, Ukraine received about 700 tanks from the Allies.
At 6:05 a.m. on August 6, 2024, the silence of the Russian border was shattered. Out of the morning haze rolled Ukraine's deadly super tanks. The Russians expected for the old T-64s, T-72s, and T-80s they knew too well. But what emerged was something far more terrifying. Upgraded in secret, these machines were faster, stronger, and deadlier than anything the battlefield had seen. For the Russian army, it was a moment of shock and the beginning of a nightmare. This isn't just a story of steel and engines. It's a story of shock, strategy, and sheer battlefield dominance. And what happens next? It only gets more insane. Let's start with the king of Ukraine's battlefield, the T-64. This tank was first built in 1964 in the Soviet Union. It was small, weighing only 38 tons, and carried just 3 soldiers. That may sound normal now, but back then, this was a revolutionary tank. It had a 125mm cannon that could fire both shells and missiles, and it had an auto-loader. That meant fewer people were needed inside, making it faster to reload than other tanks. But here's the twist. The autoloader sometimes malfunctioned. It was so bad that inexperienced gunners could actually get hurt inside the tank. Crazy, right? The T-64 was expensive, complicated, and only about 13,000 were ever built. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine inherited most of the T-64s. Along with hundreds of T-72s and some T-80s, these tanks became the backbone of Ukraine's armored forces. At first, they were just old tanks sitting in storage, but Ukraine did something incredible. They upgraded them with better engines, stronger armor, and reactive defenses that could explode outward to stop incoming missiles. One of the upgrades was the T-64BM Bulat. This tank had a new 850 horsepower engine that made it faster despite the added armor. Its cannon could shoot shells up to 2,500 meters during the day and 1,500 meters at night. And yes, it had a machine gun on top to take out infantry or low-flying drones. Here's a crazy thing. Even though the T-64 was old, these upgrades made it shockingly competitive against Russia's modern tanks. Russians expected to crush Ukraine with their own older tanks, but suddenly, Ukrainian T-64BMs were taking them out. Imagine facing a tank you thought was outdated, only to discover it now has explosive reactive armor and better firepower. WTF, right? The Russians weren't ready for that. Next, let's talk about the T-72. Ukraine didn't just keep them old, they got help from NATO countries. The US and Netherlands paid the Czech Republic to refurbish 90 T-72 tanks. They got new optics, new communications, and stronger armor. Pentagon officials even called them the most technically advanced tanks on the battlefield. The Russians had no idea these upgrades were coming. Suddenly, Ukraine was fielding tanks that could see farther, hit harder, and survive longer. The T-80, another Soviet design, was also upgraded. Originally, it had a gas turbine engine which was powerful but drank fuel like crazy. Ukraine kept the T-80 in smaller numbers but added better armor and fire control systems. The T-80B and T-80BV variants could now use guided missiles from their main gun, a feature that Russians didn't expect them to still be using effectively. These upgrades meant that Ukrainian tanks could ambush Russian columns, hit them from far away, and then disappear before Russian artillery could react. Speaking of ambushes, here's where it gets really intense. Ukrainian forces have used terrain, drones, and smart planning to create deadly kill zones. In some places, 2 small drone groups can cover a whole section of the front line. They spot Russian tanks miles away, then Ukrainian tanks move in and destroy them before the Russians even know what hit them. Imagine sitting in a tank thinking you're safe, and suddenly you're hit from an angle you didn't even see. Russians have reported that in some areas, they don't even reach the front line because Ukrainian drones and tanks pick them off first. This is like something out of a video game, but it's real life. And do you know that the longest recorded tank kill in Ukraine was achieved by a Challenger 2, hitting a Russian tank from an unprecedented distance? The Russian crews had no idea they were under attack until it was too late. It's not just the tanks themselves, it's how Ukraine combines modern technology with old tanks to create something terrifyingly effective. Ukraine didn't stop there. They also started receiving Western tanks. The Germans sent Leopard 2 tanks and the UK sent Challenger 2 tanks. These tanks are huge, fast, and carry 120mm guns capable of destroying Russian armor in seconds. Ukrainian crews trained on them in Germany and Britain and then brought them straight to the front lines. The Russians were stunned. They had prepared to fight old Soviet tanks, not Leopards and Challengers with modern optics, fire control, and armor that could shrug off their missiles. But here's a twist. Even with these advanced Western tanks, Ukraine hasn't just thrown them into the fight blindly. The soldiers are using them smartly. They combine them with drones to spot targets, use terrain to hide from enemy fire, and coordinate attacks with artillery. In cities like Bakhmut and Kharkiv, these tanks have maneuvered through tight streets, surprising Russian forces who expected armored superiority. Sometimes a single Ukrainian tank and its crew can take out multiple Russian vehicles in one engagement. Talk about skill multiplying the tank's power. And there's more. Ukrainian crews have shown incredible ingenuity in the field. Some tanks have DIY cage armor, extra sensors, and even additional machine guns mounted by hand. These modifications make the tank more resilient and more deadly. The Russians face a nightmare. Tanks they once knew inside and out have been transformed into lethal super machines with tricks they don't understand. Let's not forget the psychological factor. Russian troops have underestimated Ukrainian tanks for over 2 years. They thought old T-64s or refurbished T-72s were easy targets. Then came the ambushes, long-range shots, and urban engagements. Fear spreads quickly when soldiers realize the enemy's tanks are upgraded, better armed, and smarter in using the battlefield. This fear alone has slowed Russian offensives and sometimes forced them to fight from behind cover, losing their mobility advantage. So, how did Ukrainian tanks continue to survive and fight effectively, even when outnumbered? The answer lies in combining upgrades, drones, terrain knowledge, and tactical skill. It's a perfect storm of technology and training. Speaking of drones, they play a huge role. Ukraine's drones have evolved to resist electronic warfare, making them immune to jamming. They can scout ahead, mark targets, and even coordinate attacks with tanks in real time. Russian forces have struggled because some of their drones are poorly made or easily jammed. Meanwhile, Ukrainian tanks can move almost freely near the front line because the skies above are covered by drones. It's like having eyes everywhere. This modern battlefield synergy is changing the way armored warfare works. Even in some regions, Ukrainian tanks have achieved local superiority over the Russians for the first time since the war started. This isn't because Ukraine has more tanks overall, but because they are smarter and use technology in ways the Russians didn't anticipate. Even small tank units combined with drones can wipe out entire enemy columns. The battlefield is no longer just about numbers. It's about who sees first, who hits first, and who survives. Urban combat is another shock factor. Russian troops often expect heavy tanks to struggle in cities. But Ukrainian tanks like the T-64BM Bulat and Western Leopards have maneuvered through tight streets, firing their main guns accurately and supporting infantry. Smoke, rubble, and fire create chaos, but these tanks keep moving. The sight, sound, and smell of battle are intense. Tracer rounds fly, shells explode, and soldiers hear shouts from every direction. Ukrainian crews have learned to master this chaos while keeping their tanks operational. But that's not all. Some Ukrainian tanks have even taken on entire Russian defensive lines alone, destroying multiple enemy vehicles and breaking through fortified positions. The combination of upgrades, crew skill, and modern tactics creates a force multiplier effect. One tank can suddenly become a nightmare for an entire Russian unit. Let's not forget to talk about something very important: the future. Ukraine has Leopard 2s, Challenger 2s, and even Abrams tanks. They are faster, stronger, and better armored than almost anything the Russians have. But Ukraine also knows they have limited numbers. The strategy now is careful deployment. Use these tanks where they can make the biggest difference, support infantry, and continue to use drones and electronic warfare to stay ahead. The Russians face a battlefield full of surprises where old tactics no longer work. The war isn't over, and the Russians still don't know what Ukrainian forces will do next. New upgrades, clever tactics, and daring maneuvers are coming. Could Ukraine's tanks push even further, cutting off Russian supply lines and changing the course of the war? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: Ukraine's deadly super tanks have already shocked the Russians, and the story is far from finished. Ukraine's super tanks shocked the Russians, but now Russia strikes back with long-range drones. Watch our next video to see these deadly attacks in action.